Greetings, folks, and welcome to the Electromaker Podcast. This is the audio version of what is usually a YouTube video show, but this is a very special edition. This is our Maker Music Festival 2023 special edition, and that's one of the reasons this podcast is special, but the other reason is that this is a completely different podcast to the YouTube show. Usually, this podcast is just the audio from the YouTube show I do every week, and this is the same content, but I thought that since the Maker Music Festival is a visual and audio medium, and for the most part I am talking over the audio about the visual aspect of it. It did not make good podcast material this week, so I decided to record a completely separate podcast with the same material as the show, but in a much more audio-friendly format. I'll say right at the start, if this is something that people really like the idea of, I can try and make the time to do this for every show if you would prefer. It is going to be a slightly different vibe, for want of a better word, because I will not be quite as performative and loud because there's not a camera in my face. I'm sitting down even. But by the same token, it will be specifically designed for podcast audio, so maybe that will come across better. I don't know. Please do tell me in the Discord via email, ian@electromaker.io, or however you wish to contact me. If you do send a pigeon, please do let them know that yes, the top window of our house does not open. Something I only found out recently, that the top window in our stairwell doesn't open, when there was in fact a pigeon stuck there. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this very special version of the Electromaker Show. Oh, and I'm sorry that this is a couple of days later than the YouTube show. As you can maybe hear in my voice if you've watched the video version of that, I was in the middle of losing it. I was getting a bit sick, and my voice is just coming back, as you can probably also hear. This is also the part of the introduction I should probably say, that we do not have sponsors on this podcast, we do not have a Patreon, we do not do any of the usual ways of making money for a podcast. Everything that happens with Electromaker happens via the Electromaker store. Electromaker.io, click on the store tab, or is it the shop tab? I should probably know this. However, we stock everything from your first Arduino starter kit to large numbers of fairly heavy industrial gear. Just let us know if you do need large numbers of it. I'm sure we can accommodate that. Do check out the shop. That's a great way of supporting the podcast. And without further ado, let's get into the Maker Music Festival 2023. So, just to give a brief introduction as to how this podcast is going to sort of work. The MakerMusicFestival.com website is a very beautiful website. It harks back to a time before all websites had to be entirely functional with a login feature, and I'm not knocking those kind of websites whatsoever. Electromaker is one, for example, and if you don't already have an account, please do show us your projects. I talk enough about how much I love that. However, I am also a fan of that sort of weird golden era of the internet where you could have websites which had a big overlap in the grand Venn diagram between websites and point-and-click adventures, if such a Venn diagram ever did exist. Where the websites aren't necessarily clearly labeled, but you kind of knew what to do, and you could delve into them to find out more and to find interesting things. And of course, there have been great adventures built into websites that are exactly what that era was. You know, they are point-and-click adventures. This is not so much a point-and-click adventure. The MakerMusicFestival.com website is visually very interesting because each building, and they are cartoon buildings, is a university campus. So, for example, the splash site, the first page you will land on is the Moog building, which is a picture of a building with various windows. And as you may expect, if you click on any one of those windows, you get to see what is happening inside. And what is happening inside is one aspect of the Maker Music Festival, an online virtual festival for makers who are musicians and musicians who are makers. So what's going to happen is, essentially, I will give a quick introduction to the name of the person who's created this piece and the piece itself, and describe visually what is going on in the video, because each one of these are submitted as videos, before playing the audio of each piece. If you are not someone who's a fan of experimental music, there's probably some bits you will want to skip, and that's absolutely fine. I will say that not all of it is scratchy, crazy weirdness. You will hear some of it is very beautiful, some of it is very out there electronic avant-garde, as is the nature of any kind of submitted festival with self-made instruments. But yes, so once the pieces have played, I will give you a brief outro to them, and I'll try to remember to tell you where to find them on the website, in that each one of them is in a building and a window. However, if at any point I forget to do that, do check the show notes, because there are links to every single one of these things, including how to find them on the website. Usually there'd just be links, but again, because of the nature of this website, if I say the third window to the right on the top row of the Bob Moog building, for example, that sounds like nonsense to a podcast listener, but if you're looking at the website, it makes absolute sense that I'm saying you're clicking here. And I think that is everything. Oh, and the one other thing is, I'm sure I've made excuses like this before on the show. If there are any weird abrupt cuts or anything, I am still getting over a cold, as you can probably hear from the tone of my voice. So it's probably just because I've had a coughing bout and I needed to cut that out and try and pick up from where I stopped. So apologies in advance if there are a few little moments like that. And without any further ado, here are a few choice cuts from the Maker Music Festival 2023. By all means, not even close to everything that is there, and I still haven't seen everything from the 2023 festival so far, but it is my favorite virtual festival as a musician and maker myself. I do hope you enjoy this, and yeah, let's go. The first project we'll be looking at is from Joseph Such, and it is called Motor Drone. And the idea behind it is very simple. One string on a disembodied guitar neck, and a bunch of different pressable keys that allow you to change the position that the string is being played tonally. But instead of plucking the string yourself, there is a motor with a plectrum attached to it and a speed dial on the side. And there is a beautiful simplicity to this project, but it is visually very nice. It's all made out of wood, and it's you can see how simplistic it is when you look at it, but it doesn't change the fact that it is very pleasing to look at, and the sounds he gets out of it are actually very interesting indeed. But that's because in the video that you're about to watch, there's a looping pedal to make things more interesting, as he says, and it really does. In fact, I believe there's a loop pedal and maybe some reverb or something, or there's something beautifully resonant going on, because as you're about to hear, there's the sound of the instrument and then there's the sound of the looping instrument, and those two things together make for a very beautiful sound indeed. So that was the Motor Drone by Joseph Such. I believe the audio was just the camera audio, which is why there maybe wasn't all that much bass in it. I could be wrong about that, but I get the impression that that was not captured direct, and that there will be a lot more bass and a lot more sound to that instrument where it captured a different way. I should point out as well, by the way, that Joseph Such is... I did not realize this when I was putting the show together originally. He is the person who produced the first Maker Music Festival in California back in 2018. There was a physical event in Sebastopol, California, where he is the president of a makerspace there. And I think I vaguely knew this and had forgotten it. And because of the pandemic, he came up with the idea of having a framework which would allow you to have an online virtual experience. And interestingly, it's called Decameron Row. The idea, it's a collection of videos. I'm vaguely reading from the About page of the Maker Music Festival here. Collection of videos created by noted artists, writers, musicians, and dancers. The videos are presented as views into apartments in a row of buildings, which is interesting because if I'm not I may be mistaken. This might just be a link that isn't there, but I'm almost certain that Decameron Row must be a reference to the Decameron, which is a famous novel from a long time ago. 1500s, might have that wrong. Also, Italy might have that wrong. But the idea being, it's short stories, snapshots into different people's lives. And if it is a reference to that, it's a very good reference. Anyway, yes, so that was Joseph Such. And next up we have Simple DIY Electronic Music Projects, who is someone who I'm sure, if you are familiar with the Electromaker Show, you will be familiar with. He is a viewer of the show and has one of the finest blogs online you can find about making music with microcontrollers. If you know me, you know that making music with microcontrollers is something that I am quite passionate about. And if you would like to find his project, I should mention before I go on, if you would like to find the motor drone on the Moog page of the website, on the Moog building, on the top row of Moog, you're looking for the second last window, motor drone, Joseph Such. Now, if you click on the arrow at the side of the Moog building, you will get to the Subotnik building, named after the fantastic Morton Subotnik, someone I don't have time to talk about now, but you should definitely give a Google to the name Morton Subotnik. Very, very interesting dude who I learned about when I was studying music. And if you look at the middle top window, you will find the Lo-Fi Orchestra from Kevin, who I'm sure you are already familiar with. But let's listen to the Flight of the Bumblebee, played by various Arduino Nanos, RP2040 development boards, whose name I always forget, and it's the Pico, isn't it? I just call them the RP2040 boards, and with various other things going on. And as always, if you would like to find out more about this, his blog is a wonderful place to find out everything. He has documented pretty much everything he's done making music with these things, and you could go from knowing nothing to knowing a huge amount about making music with microcontrollers, MIDI, the whole works, just from his site. But anyway, without any further ado, the Lo-Fi Orchestra plays Flight of the Bumblebee. So the Arduino Lo-Fi Orchestra, also known as the Lo-Fi Orchestra, from Kevin, also known as Simple DIY Electronic Music Projects blog, which you can find at diyelectromusic.wordpress.com. And I cannot stress enough, if I did not stress it enough beforehand, that despite me being someone who has spent a fair amount of time trying to get low-powered Arduinos and various other microcontrollers to make sounds for a long time, there is no finer place on the internet to find out about making music with things like microcontrollers, specifically Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, and the things that could be programmed in similar ways. So moving on to a new feature from the Maker Music Festival. So 2023 was the first one that had some educational material designed to help teachers guide classes through what the Maker Music Festival is. Same with the lecturers. They're also very useful for the shall we say, casual observer, because as much as it is great fun to window dive or into the virtual windows of the virtual buildings of the virtual campus that makes up the Maker Music Festival website, again, that's something that will make no sense to any listener until they've actually visited the website. But yes, as much as it is great fun to do that and just see what you find, these are curated sets of projects. And so, for example, the field trips are a very interesting idea. The field trips they basically group projects together by form. So some of them are stringed instruments or percussive instruments, or some of them are geographical. So some of the projects from East Asia, projects from France. Some of them are based on material, so are they using repurposed materials? And if I remember correctly, there's one section which is based purely on capacitive touch instruments called the Makey section. Because of course, the very famous Makey, which was the capacitive touch thing that took the internet by storm because of how easy it was to use. The one that, sorry, I just had to cut out some coughing there. The one that really caught my imagination was the instruments that include records and cassette tapes. Because despite being someone who loves digital and microcontrollers and all that kind of stuff, I am still a bit of a tape fanatic. I have a lot of tapes. I make tape loops. I own enough records that I should actually be playing them often, but I do not own a record player currently, which is to my shame. However, Victoria Shen's Resin Records project is something that really grabbed me. So this is from the Resin Records page. Let me pause that for a moment. We're going to play it in a second. Taking pre-existing records, cutting them up, mixing and reassembling the pieces and forming a silicon mold around the new Franken record, and then pouring resin into the mold along with embedded objects. And in case that description didn't give you a clue, this is where things start to sound weird, but in a wonderfully chaotic way. Because this is a way of essentially taking two separate records and smashing them together so they do actually still work as one coherent record with two different tracks cutting between them, which is something that you don't think that you can do in an analog sense very easily. I mean, yes, historically, experimental music was done by cutting up tape, but I don't think anyone was cutting up records, and that's what makes this a very interesting process. It's much closer to a sort of industrial plastics process or some kind of very weird 3D printing Franken format. I'm taking Franken from Franken record, aren't I, than anything else. But rather than me trying to explain it anymore, let's just listen to the rather wacky output. So yes, Resin Records by Victoria Shen. And this is one of the ones that you really should go and look at. I mean, I hope that you go and look at the Maker Music Festival website after listening to this podcast. I hope I've done a good enough job of impressing on you how interesting it is to see something like this at this point in the internet. But also just the level of inventiveness of all of the artists. All of these reasons, I hope you go and look at it yourself. But this one, again, has a very strong visual element to it, because the first example of audio you just heard there was quite chaotic. The second was actually quite nice. And then you see it, and you literally see the two different colors of records, because they were two different colors of records that were molded together. See the point where the needle jumps from one to the other, which happily is also just that perfect thing to cut between the two samples, which again harks back to the early days of hip hop, just two samples that fit together perfectly. And see some of the examples of this process, because once the two records have been melted together, they're filled with resin and various objects, and each one is a work of art in and of itself, a functional work of art, however. One of them, which I think is just such a fantastic idea, is the 3-speed record, which combines a 33 RPM 12-inch, a 78 RPM 10-inch, and a 45 RPM 7-inch records to make a single record that plays at 3 speeds simultaneously. And to go back to that particular field trip, this is one of 2 projects that Victoria Shen has on that page. There's also a Cinescope by Brian Alexander, who we'll be coming back to later. The Den of Cassette Surgery, which is something that appeals heavily to me, again, as someone who's very into tape. And this is just one of the field trips, again aimed at educators, because each one of them has guiding questions. What do you think it's going to sound like? Do you think this is an instrument? And then some questions which are very specific to the projects themselves. So these are, very much aimed at the classroom, but it's, like I said, just curated materials from the festival, which is a nice other way of looking at it. But now it is time to move on to the next piece. Now it is time to move over to the Xenofif building and click on the bottom right window to see the Lavanda 8. And I realize I am pronouncing Xenofif with a very German accent, considering that he was a British composer and a musician and an inventor. And interestingly enough, he was the person behind the VCS3, which was an early portable synthesizer. And if I remember correctly, the same synthesizer that made the very famous synthesizer track in Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, and to my shame I'm forgetting the name of that track. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. If you do click on that bottom right window, you will find Marcello Kreiser, who is a visual and sound artist, and his wonderful synthesizer called Lavanda 8. So, visually, it is a black box with a bunch of different knobs on it. It has 8 screws, and these screws are capacitive touch sensors. So wherever you put your finger on them, you can change the note. Each one of those screws has a switch above it. And as I said in the video version of this show, he gives away a little but not enough. It's a live improvisation polyphonic machine with 8 tunable oscillators, a choice of long or short envelopes each. I'm reading from the About page here. One of them is capable of random notes. It also contains a voltage-controlled low-pass filter and a voltage-controlled delay. It took maybe 4 months to complete development. And there was also a simpler version with just 5 oscillators. But as you're about to hear, this does not sound like a normal synthesizer in terms of its tuning, and I suspect that the capacitive touch sensors that he has, which chooses which note that is playing, can combine in interesting ways. And again, if you're not into experimental crazy synth sounds, this might not be for you, but it's absolutely the kind of thing that I love. So that was Marcello Kreiser's Lavanda 8. And it does have a little cutout where you'd think maybe a screen would go, but there is actually just a picture of some lavender in there, which I assume is the name behind it. Again, sorry, I had to cut out another cough there. I hope I remember to cut out all of these coughs. If not, you're going to hear my terrible... I don't usually cough like this. I have a cold. If you would like to hear more of the Lavender 8, all of the things that you are hearing, all of the videos when they pop up on these pages, there are various tabs, and under the Connect section, almost all of the artists have some way of connecting with them. Marcello has a YouTube page where there is a further 2.5 minutes of him playing with Lavender 8, and you can hear more sounds that it makes. So far, I have played you the entirety of each one of the pieces that you will be hearing. As time goes on in the show, I might cut down some of the pieces just for brevity's sake, but I will tell you when I do so you can listen, go and listen to more of it if you would like. But yes, I wanted to include that one because one of the things I love about these festivals is that it's where everyone gets out the crazy music boxes they've been working on. And the beauty of this one is that I would love to know exactly what's going on inside the box there. I'd love to know exactly how he's making 8 separate voices of oscillators and modulating them in the way that he is, but I have absolutely no idea how he's done that. There's a million ways you could do it, and whichever way he's chosen to do it, it does sound very nice indeed. Now, we are staying on the Zino Vif building in the virtual campus of the Maker Music Festival, and we are clicking on the very central window, which is a piece called Opaline. And as a brief piece of introduction to this, this is a performance with someone standing on a stage in front of a vibraphone with 2 snare drums to each side of them. And the piece itself is a vibraphone piece, perhaps unsurprisingly. And the snare drums on each side are there for a reason. If you've ever played in a band or been in a room where there is a snare drum, where there is other sound playing, you will find that snare drums are incredibly prone to any kind of vibration. The snare will make a sound. It'll make a noise along with any kind of vibration in the room, which can be incredibly annoying if you don't want it, but if you do, it's a real asset. And the idea is these snare drums are placed on both sides of the vibraphone so that the sounds from the vibraphone and the speakers will make that sound. And beyond this, the vibraphone itself is being processed by Max MSP to enhance the sound. So triggering effects that change and grow in intensity, I'm reading from the About page here, over the course of a 4-minute piece. What I'm going to do is play the first minute of the piece and the last minute of the piece. I'd love to play the whole piece, but this podcast is going to be quite long as it is. I would very much advise going and finding Opaline in the middle window of Zino Vif, and watching it, because it is a really beautiful piece. Olivia has written, just a beautiful piece that stands by itself, but the processing is subtle, really well done. The snare drums add a lot to it. As you can probably tell, I am quite a fan of this piece, and I have been listening to it while out running since I heard it for the first time. Without further ado, let's listen to it. What a truly lovely piece of music that is. And again, as I said before, one of the things about this that I really did enjoy is the fact that it is not... It's the other end of the Maker Music Festival spectrum, in that this is essentially a really well-written piece of vibraphone music that makes use of a mostly undesirable trait of snare drums, but that is so highly enhanced by just a little bit of technology, because those beautifully... I was going to say fragrant, which is a very stupid word. It is a shimmering and very delicate sound that you hear over the top of the vibraphone in that piece. And despite the fact that I said that I was probably going to cut out some of that, I think you probably just heard it in its entirety, given that it is just shy of 4 minutes long. And I think I said I was going to play you the first couple of minutes, then the last couple of minutes of it, which would be 4 minutes anyway, which is very, very silly. Anyway, moving on. The next part of this podcast you're about to hear is the audio from the YouTube show. Because it is a section that you will be familiar with already. It is our Product of the Week section, and of course our giveaway. We are giving away an Arduino Nano Every on this week's show. So I shall hand over to Ian from the video part of the Electromaker Show, and be back with the podcast audio just after that. Now, it is time for a very quick, brief break from the Maker Music Festival just to talk about our latest product of the week. As you will know if you've been following Electromaker for the last little while, we have been doing deeper dives on certain things and giving one of them away each time. And this one is sort of an iconic moment in Arduino history, because Arduino had been making the same boards of various types for a very long time, and some of them were very powerful, some of them were less so. And then they started to systematically go through and upgrade each one of their lines of boards. And the Arduino Nano Every was one of the first that they did that with. It was the first major upgrade to the Nano pretty much since its first release, and it was an incremental but actually quite good upgrade when you look at the price and what you get with it. Anyway, as always, don't take my word for it. Rich and Robin have been very busy putting together the latest Product of the Week video, which you may have already seen if you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. It went live just a short while ago. And yes, this is Robin Mitchell, our in-house gadget guru, to take you through all of the major changes that this brings. As always, he will give you a far better rundown of it than I will, but just in brief, one of the things about the Every that I thought was quite interesting is it's still using an Atmel chip. I can't remember which the new Atmel chip is, but it's not the 328P. A newer chip which is a bit more capable. It adds double the memory, or double the RAM, and a little bit more program memory. I can't remember if it has USB host, but what it does have is an onboard logic system, which I think they mentioned here as well. A custom, a configurable custom logic unit with 4 lookup tables, which is really cool, because if you know you're going to be working with lookup tables, you can just have these things work by themselves. They are similar but not as powerful as the Raspberry Pi RP2040's PIOs, is what I understand of it. And again, this is a bottom line Arduino board, so it is cheap as well. That's the other side of it that's kind of good, especially if you're going to be buying these in bulk to teach kids about programming for the first time. The Nano Every is quite a good one. It comes with headers or without. So, enough waxing lyrical about the thing itself. If you'd like to find out more, do head over to this article, do check out the video. I'm amazed at these things that Robin and Rich have been working on. Like I said, this is something that was thought about behind the scenes for a very long time, and I'm really glad that I get to talk about it now. That said, I did mention that we were going to give one of these away, and we absolutely are. And we're going to give it away the way that we always do. All you need to be is subscribed to this YouTube channel, or if you're entering on Twitter or anything like that, just make sure you're following us on that platform. Tell us what you would do with an Arduino Nano Every and leave the hashtag Nano. And that way we can just search for Nano across all of our social and video and blah, 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 and add them all to a spreadsheet and choose one at random, which is just the fairest way of doing it, really. So yes, the Arduino Nano Every, a incremental but very nice update to the original Arduino Nano, and if you'd like to win one, well, this is how. Moving on to the follower, a kinetic-based ambient sound sculpture by Brian Alexander, which visually looks a little bit like the old image of what a scales would look like. Before we all had digital worktop kitchen scales, you had scales with 2 sides. One side, the thing you wanted to weigh, and the other side was, of course, the weight you were weighing it against. And you have that here. You have 2 bowls, which are sort of each side of the scales. But in the middle, you have a red light and a few servos with lights on pieces of string. And inside the bowls are ball bearings, and they're being moved around in various different ways. So to read the About section just quickly. As I previously mentioned, the follower is a kinetic-based ambient sound sculpture inspired by the naturalistic semi-looping qualities of shorelines, waves, and rain. There are 2 primary and 2 secondary voices which overlap and disperse over time as each runs at a slightly different clock speed. And with that, let's hear it. Again, this is one that I would implore you to go and watch yourself. The video for this piece is very artistic, but also, really shows of exactly what this piece is about. I'm really interested to know exactly what is going on here, because the ball bearings in the 2 metal balls are clearly one of the sounds that you are hearing. However, there's another voice, and I'm trying to work out exactly how that works, because the servos that I mentioned at the top, and again, I would suggest going and looking at it, because it's very difficult for me to give context purely in audio format. But there are sort of fishing rod servos crossing over the top of the piece, the sculpture, and they both have light bulbs hanging from them, which presumably are being occluded by the balls, and so less light is getting to certain light sensors, which I'm not exactly sure where they are, which are controlling some kind of synthesizer, I suppose. But yeah, I would love to really get into the nitty-gritty of how this thing works. If you are interested in finding out more, you can head to the page. This is Trace Bloom Audio is the name of the project. And you will find many more projects like this on the Trace Bloom website. There is even a QR code in the video on the Maker Music website, which will take you to the Trace Bloom website. And it is definitely worth looking at. If you are specifically interested in the engineering meets music side of things, you will like this. Making music using solar panels, making inductive instruments that use EMF as their primary point of expression, and various things like that. Now, moving over to a piece called Unnatural Nature by Eloise Zelada, which you can find on the Zinoviv page of the website, which is the top row middle window. Now, this installation appealed to me on multiple levels, but a big part of it for me is that it is a data sonification project. And if you're not familiar with the concept of data sonification, if I was to try and put it into a sentence, it is taking any data set and turning it into interesting sounds or music. That is the process of data sonification. And to read a small section from the About page of this piece, Unnatural Nature is a multi-part installation that aims to raise awareness about the global issue of climate change through an immersive and interactive experience. The installation is comprised of 2 time-based distinct parts that are designed to seamlessly transition from one to the other, creating a cohesive and impactful experience for participants. Now, I should mention at this part that I think the video on the site is corrupted. Unfortunately, we are not going to see the second part of this experience. After about a minute and a half, the video just stops, and I've tried downloading it from the website. By the way, because of the way this website is made, every single one of these videos is available to download very easily. You just click on the 3 dots on the video player and it'll download. It is a basic JavaScript video player, which is a breath of fresh air to me as someone who has to jump through hoops and download YouTube videos as audio from the command line when I want to listen to things. But yes, I thought I'd mention that. However, even trying that does not help. So we're not going to be hearing the second part of it, but we can talk about the first part. Again, quoting the About page. The first part of the installation is accompanied by a data and audio-driven visual design projected on a full wall display with coloured lights. This is using a 22-speaker third-order ambisonic system, which I'm not going to try and pretend I understand. I've done quadraphonic sound a long time in the past. That was enough for me. And all of this data that is being sonified is taken from NASA's data sets on the way that the climate has changed due to human interaction over the last while, from the mid-1800s to the present day, if I remember correctly. This was an installation from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, USA, and it's quite recent. The debut of this was April 8th this year. So let's hear at least the first short part of Unnatural Nature. And as previously mentioned, that just over 2 minutes is all that actually exists currently on the Making Music website of the 7-minute piece. I would love to see the rest of it. Because, well, firstly, as I mentioned, data sonification is something that I'm very interested in as someone who, is a hobby programmer, hobby microcontroller person, musician by training, I suppose you could call it. I don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with all that kind of stuff. But long story short, yes, I know how to use synthesizers and I know how to work with data. Data sonification is a very interesting thing to me, and I've already tried to turn a few of my runs. My watch produces huge amounts of data every time I go running, and I've already tried to turn that into music. And I have a deep respect for anyone that can take data sets and make nice music out of it. And that is a whole world in and of itself. The second half of this piece, which I'll only cover briefly because unfortunately we have no way of really experiencing it at this stage, is various plants hung around the arena which had motion sensors on it so that people could move the plants, touch the plants, and that would also create sound. And as you can tell, this is a very environment and habitat focused piece. And again, covers so many different forms of technology, something I find very, very interesting indeed. Next, we have a piece by Alexandra Bertaud called Tubes. And if you would like to find it, this is on the Moog part of the website. It is the third window in on the middle row. And this one is very simple to explain, but in terms of the visual side of things, the video is wonderful, and the audio side of things, it was one of my favorite things from the festival this year. This is a piece comprising many clear acrylic tubes of different lengths, and on top of them, servos with circular discs attached to them, designed so that when they struck the tubes, it would make a nice sound. I don't know if you've ever picked up a tube and smacked it with your hand, but it makes a nice sound. And that is the central conceit of this piece. However, the piece is presented in a beautiful, historic, what looks like a church, perhaps, a beautiful old stone building, and all of the sounds are being processed by an effects unit in the middle of the building, and as you will hear, it is quite the audio effect. Now, a couple of interesting points about this piece. As I've mentioned, it's visually very interesting. It sounds wonderful. One of the things I really like about it from an audio point of view is that you will have heard an interesting visual component, which may have just sounded like an audio component. And I suppose it is. But each of the tubes is completely open, and the servo is at its maximum extension, you could say. But just before the tube is going to be striked, the servo moves to the position that it's going to take before it strikes it. And then just after it strikes it, obviously the servo moves back again. So this combined audio that you're hearing of that amazing like bum, 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 and the audio dropping sound, I believe, is a delay effect that is put onto the sound after the fact. And with each instance of the delay dropping the tone slightly. But you hear this bump, and that's the sound of the servo motors. And the servo motors have become part of the music in and of itself, something I really like. And the other side of it is there are sensors hidden in the room, so that if anyone was actually there to witness this piece, it would sound different because the sensors would pick up that people were there, and it would sound, well, different, I suppose. Out of everything from this particular festival, there's no such thing as favorites. Everything that I've seen from the Making Music Festival this year has had so many wonderful aspects to it. But in terms of a thing that every aspect of it grabbed me in a very specific way, I would really like to see Tubes, as this piece is called, live. And if you would like to find more, as mentioned, you can head here and find the artist's bio. Alexandra Bertaud is the name, and of course a link out to their website. And in terms of the audio aspect of this podcast, that is it. There are a couple of other things I would like to tell you about, but I'm only going to tell you about them because I believe that they are so visual that to just play you the audio wouldn't really make much sense. So, for example, there is a piece called the Synthesizer, and if you are, if you're interested in what that is, it's exactly what it sounds like. So this is the Russello building, and this is the bottom row, the second from the right, and the Synthesizer is something that I want to play. I want to play it to you, but I don't think it would make sense in podcast format because the sound is so small and so ephemeral, because the sound is literally made by the ants. So I'm going to read you the description of this piece, and if you would like to find out more, you can head to the second from the bottom right window at Russello. The Synthesizer is a project that explores the complex logistics of the harvester ant colony. I should mention at this point, by the way, that Byung-Kyu Lee, whose name I am butchering, I'm very sorry, is someone who's very interested in sound design and ants, unsurprisingly. So, these ants primarily rely on seeds for sustenance. They've developed a complex system for collecting and storing various types of seeds. So, this is a project that, they're collecting these seeds. They're capturing audio of every part of the ant colony doing this using contact microphones, and those signals are then amplified through circuitry and synthesized into an interesting soundscape using Max MSP in real time. However, The visual aspect of this anthill is amazing. There's a lot of clear resin used in the anthill with lights embedded in it. It looks very beautiful. Playing you the audio alone would not do this project it would do this project a disservice. This is someone who is, yes, into ants and synthesizers and has combined them in a beautiful way, and you should head to the Making Music website and see that for yourself if you are interested. And the same can be said for Anna Dolce's Electrosensible, which is the bottom left window and the Subotnik building in the Maker Music Festival. Again, I could play this to you, but I think it would do it a disservice, because this is so much more a visual piece than an audio one. Although, again, that's not the right thing to say. It's visual and audio at the same time. To give it a brief description, it's two canvases on a wall, both of which look like very mixed media pieces of art. One canvas has wires poking out of it with an LED and a capacitor and a 555 timer and a speaker, and there's a jack cable coming out of it, and then there's another canvas next to it with this huge piece of graphite. If you imagine you took the lead out of a pencil and just smashed it across a canvas with extra pieces of wire. And that is literally what is there. The graphite is there to be a conductive and resistive foil for the human skin, which will then trigger a 555 timer to make sound. And there's a reason I'm not playing you the audio of that, because it's as chaotic sounding as any Atari Punk console would be, but to get the visual side of it is really the key. And the same could be said for so many pieces that I watched from this Maker Music Festival. As I said, the range of pieces is so wide, and I haven't even touched upon things which are more software based. There's a huge amount of software hacking going on here. Everything from people getting their doors to do things that they wouldn't normally do, to taking everyday objects and connecting them to doors. Some of the pieces you've seen today have done that to an extent. Right through to one of my favorite genres of maker music hacking, which is getting Minecraft, the computer game Minecraft, to do ever increasingly crazy things with sequencing and synthesis and connecting it to external instruments. And yeah, Minecraft is one of the most fun digital audio workspaces of the recent age. That's a whole show in and of itself. But yes, I hope this brief window into the Maker Music Festival and something I'm very passionate about has been interesting to you. And thank you for joining me for it. So that has been the podcast for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. I understand that this was a very different kind of podcast to what you normally get from Electromaker. Obviously, I am speaking in a different way. A large part of that is because of the fact that my voice is still recovering from having a cold. But I am also aware of the fact that I have been speaking differently because I'm not performing for a camera and I'm talking about a slightly different subject to normal. So if you have not enjoyed this, don't worry. Things will be going back to normal next week. If you have enjoyed this, please do let me know. As I've said many times in the past, I am very open to the idea of doing more podcast specific things for the Electromaker Show, but so far I have not had anyone reach out and say it's something that they would actually find valuable. And until that point, I will probably just continue putting out the YouTube show as a podcast, because as I have heard from many people, it works surprisingly well as a podcast. Anyway, the Maker Music Festival is something that I am very passionate about, and it is something that I will continue to talk about in years to come. However, we will be having a regular Electromaker show next week, and there will probably remain regular Electromaker shows up until the next time that we go to another conference, which will be coming up later in the year. I am almost certain at this point that we will be going back out to Rome again to cover Maker Faire Rome. Hopefully, I'll be able to get to a more local Maker Faire before then as well. There are ones that happen here in Germany, but as of yet, I'm yet to go to one. Anyway, with all of that said, I do hope you're having a fun, safe, and creative week. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I'll speak to you soon.